Welcome back to the WHHI News. Joining me now, 14th Circuit Solicitor Duffie Stone to talk about some bills that are circulating at the State House. One is the Homicide by Child bill. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Explain this. This is a bill that's been put out there before. What exactly is it?
Well, and we had this bill. This bill went through the General Assembly last year. It did not get passed. This came about, as you recall, and I think I've actually talked to you about this on this program. We had a 13-year-old child with cerebral palsy whose mother and boyfriend put her in the back of a car in the middle of the summer and left her there for 6 hours while they were high on meth, they were having sex, they were literally in some situations at some time within 20 feet of the child as she was dying. The car temperatures reached, we had an expert that actually testified the car temperature reached between 118 and 135 with the heat index, and the child died of hypothermia. This was a textbook child abuse, a homicide by child abuse case. It was clear that there was an extreme indifference to that child's life. It was clear that they caused the child's death. Because of the cerebral palsy, the child, although she was 13, could not free herself. The problem is, in South Carolina, our child abuse laws do not include anyone over the age of 11.
So you could not
So
use
we
that.
we could not charge that. We ended up having to charge murder, which was a much more difficult case to prove. We were able to get a conviction, but it highlighted a problem we had with our laws. South Carolina, several years ago, the General Assembly raised the age for defendants. A defendant at age 16, 17 is still a child. Once they become 18, they become an adult. But for this homicide by child abuse statute, a child is 10.
Wow.
And if they become 11, they're no longer considered a child. So it's one of those fixes that seems very simple on its face.
So you want to raise it up to age?
I just want a child to be a child, and I want a child to be considered a child for the purpose of that homicide by child abuse statute. I'm not the only solicitor that's had cases like this. We had at least 2 other solicitors that had cases pending last year. Not the same fact scenarios, but something similar in which it's clearly child abuse. The child dies, but the children were over the age of 11. And in our case, it was probably a little bit more severe because while Christina, the child, was 13, she wasn't a child for the purpose of the homicide by child abuse statute. She wasn't because she had cerebral palsy. If she was an adult, she would be considered a vulnerable adult. Wow. But she's not an adult either.
So that really is just kind of, there was no way to process it as homicide by child abuse.
And it's something that last year, as I said, it went through the General Assembly last year. It was passed out of the Senate rather quickly. I testified at the Senate on this bill. There were no questions. Everybody sort of looked at that as a relatively simple and appropriate fix, but it got hung up in the House and it didn't get passed.
Do you think there's a better chance of that now? Obviously, it's gone from subcommittee at the Senate. It's going to go up for a vote and go to the House for a committee and then hopefully up for a vote.
The most bills that I'm interested in, look, the General Assembly is doing a lot of different changes in the law that do not affect me or that I'm not 100% focused on. This is important to the solicitors in South Carolina. I think it's important to public safety. And so we've kept a very strong eye on this. We've testified. We've tried to push it along. I think it has a very good chance of passing because, quite frankly, I haven't heard anybody tell me why it shouldn't pass. There doesn't seem to be any argument against it.
Do we know, is this a bill that is already in place in a lot of other states across the country? Or not?
I don't know. I just found, I'll be honest with you, as I was preparing the Pangalangan case, as I was getting ready to try the case, I was thinking in terms of charging homicide by child abuse. I went to the statute and found that it didn't apply to somebody over the age of 10, and that was sort of a surprise to me. So I don't know. I don't know that a lot of people even realize that this was a part of the law, but the good news is this. Most legislation dies in subcommittee.
That's
it goes
right.
to subcommittee. Sometimes they don't even have hearings.
Yeah, I know.
We've had a hearing on the subcommittee. It passed out of there 2 weeks ago. This week it passed the Senate Judiciary, and so now it goes to the Senate floor. That's some pretty good progress, and it's quick. So I'm looking. I think we have a really good chance of getting it passed this year.
It's important to you. I know all of the solicitors. It's important to you. If people are interested in this because it's going to be moving to the House, they want to maybe send an email, give a call to their rep.
When it gets out of the Senate, I'm going to try very hard to get the word out that let's get this thing passed. I don't know why it didn't get through the House last year. There were a lot of bills toward the end of that session that were stockpiled, and I think there were some that they just didn't get to. But we have a lot of highly placed members of the delegation in the House and the Senate, and so I'm optimistic.
Great. Well, keep us posted on that. You're going to come back in this next segment. You're going to talk about a gang racketeering bill that you're working on as well, okay?
Okay, great.
We will be back in just a moment.